evening and welcome. I would first like to start by thanking Library Director Sharon Martino for helping to present this program this evening, and also to her staff. And I would also like to thank Daniel Cox from the Cultural Trust for his technical assistance, and also to Armstrong, because they're here this evening out of their community spirit to record this presentation this evening. So I guess it's time to start the program. This project is dedicated to all men and women who answered the call to duty during World War II. But we're also here tonight to honor all veterans, men and women alike, who have served our nation's military throughout our American history. As you may now know, the National World War II Museum is located in New Orleans and opened in 2000. It is massive and encompasses buildings covering 6 acres of exhibits. When visitors to this museum enter the Solomon Theater that seats 262 visitors, they will witness a 4D film narrated and produced by actor Tom Hanks, and the narration begins as follows. After Pearl Harbor, the nation began to mobilize from Connellsville, Pennsylvania to Austin, Texas. Our town was mentioned because we set a record for the highest percentage of men accepted into the Marine Corps in the first 4 weeks after the attack at Pearl Harbor. This set a national enlistment record. I spoke with the curator of the museum several months ago, and she said they acknowledged Connellsville because their research found a Daily Courier article from February the 5th, 1942, that reported this high rate of enlistment. Obviously, the museum did their homework, and they felt our town deserved that wonderful recognition. It only proves that our area men were definitely part of the greatest generation. When I was a faculty member at our high school, we would annually invite our area veterans to speak about their World War II experiences. But that was over 20 years ago, and unfortunately, many of those World War II veterans are no longer with us. But I feel compelled to share a story about one of those special guest speakers, Mr. Pete Connellsville. He said that he and his fellow soldiers were separated from the rest of his platoon on a cold and snowy night during the Battle of the Bulge. They decided to wait in a foxhole till dawn and hopefully hook up with their unit. In the dark of night, he heard footsteps crunching in the snow and looked up to find 2 German soldiers with their rifles drawn. Their lives were spared, but both of these GIs became prisoners of war. Pete told the class about the horrific conditions in the POW camp. They slept on a wooden board with no pillow and no mattress. They had only 1 meal a day, watered down soup, and 1 piece of dried stale bread. He never changed his clothes or his underwear for 4 months. And in that 4-month period, he had 1 shower. He was depressed and ready to give up and die. He had drawn the outline of the state of Pennsylvania on the back of his Army field jacket and penciled the name of Connellsville in the map's lower left corner. One day, someone tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Are you from Connellsville?" And Pete said, "Yes." And the other GI said, "Well, so am I." That other GI was my Uncle Fred Rote. They became best friends, and Pete said my Uncle Fred gave him the determination to survive. Pete told the students that after the war, when our veterans returned home into New York Harbor, he saw the most beautiful lady he had ever seen, the Statue of Liberty. Pete passed away in 1999, and his final resting place is in St. Rita's Cemetery. I'm sure you've noticed that unfortunately, we do not have a memorial honor roll like other surrounding communities, but we are working to change that. And yes, Connellsville did have an honor roll during World War II. It was located approximately where Brian Kissel's accounting office is now. Here's a photo from the Daily Courier issue of June the 17th, 1949, announcing that the honor roll had been sold by the City Council for $10,000 to businessman Alex Chin and was scheduled to be demolished. The demolition project was not well received by the community, but it did proceed. I began to hope that one day Connellsville would have a memorial honor roll to honor those who died serving our military during the time of war. So in June 2018, I contacted various entities like the VFW, the American Legion, local libraries, and historical societies, and I was told they did not have a listing of names for those who died during time of war. So I began a computer search to try to develop an accurate list of names for what I hoped would culminate in a granite memorial with each name carved into the stone. My research showed that just from Fayette County alone, there were 148 deaths in World War I, 652 in World War II, 60 in Korea, and 45 in Vietnam. I had an alphabetized list of names, but the hometown of each man was not provided. I needed to refine the information. It was a very lengthy and tedious process, but once I started, I became obsessed. By October of 2018, more accurate facts were developing, and I asked several community residents to help form a committee to find a location for the memorial and eventually raise money for the construction. The committee voted to include names of those who lived within the boundaries of what is now the Connellsville Area School District. Many sites for this honor roll were discussed. We contacted people who owned private property, but for their personal reasons, they were unwilling to donate or unwilling to sell the property. But we knew we wanted it to be very visible, and we wanted it on the parade route for both the Memorial Day and Veterans Day parades. Progress was slow, but I wanted to learn more about these men. They were our hometown men, and that made it even more powerful because it was so personal. They weren't just a name. They had a life, a family. They were someone's son, a brother, an uncle, a classmate, neighbor, and in some cases, a husband and a young father. They deserve to be honored, remembered, and memorialized. In addition to a permanent granite memorial, my hope was to create a written document to honor and memorialize these fallen heroes, a document that would preserve their memory for generations, to be passed down to children and grandchildren. I chose to start the first written project with World War II because it was the deadliest in world history. This summer, I completed the second written project, Devotion to Duty, to honor those from Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East conflicts. Here's a copy of the Daily Courier article dated July the 28th, 1943, that told of the children of Mr. and Mrs. Salvatore Cortez of Dunbar. The Cortez family had a flag like this in their front window. There were 6 stars, one for Anthony, who was lost in combat in March of 1943, a star for Joe, Nick, Jack, stepson Frank Lango, who was killed at Pearl Harbor, and one for Mary, who joined the waves in 1943. I've donated this to the Connellsville Canteen, and I was able to borrow it for this evening. This is a flag that was in my grandparents' front window at 1009 Sycamore Street on the south side. There are only 2 stars, one for my dad, Herbert L. Rote, who was a member of the 1st Division, also known as the Big Red One, and he saw combat in the invasion of North Africa, the invasion of Sicily, combat in Germany and France. After the Second World War, he was one of the original members of the U.S. Army Reserve Unit based at Hillcrest. He spent 20 years in the Army Reserves, and he won 2 Bronze Stars during the Second World War. The other star is for his younger brother, my Uncle Fred, who was a member of the Third Army and was captured by the Germans. He received a Purple Heart, and he spent a total of 35 years in the United States Army. He did 2 tours of duty in Korea, and he retired as a command sergeant major. So this flag is about 80 years old. But I've given it to the canteen in honor of all the veterans, but especially to honor my dad and his brother. I would now like to share a very small glimpse into the lives of just 17 of the men memorialized in this book. Staff Sergeant Robert Albine was a 1941 graduate of Connellsville High School, and he served as an aerial gunner in a flying fortress and participated in a low-level bombing run on the Palesti oil fields in Romania on August 1st, 1943. After completing many more successful bombing missions, his plane never returned from a mission over Germany on February the 20th, 1944. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. Private First Class Robert Burns was a 1942 graduate of Immaculate Conception High School, where he served as vice president of the junior class. He loved to sing and dance and served on the student council. He was the only child, and his father, John, was a World War I veteran. Robert lost his life on February the 2nd, 1944 in Italy, and is buried in the Sicily, Rome American Cemetery. Private First Class Anthony Canada was a member of the 1st Division, and he was killed on April the 30th, 1943 at Tunisia during the invasion of North Africa. He was the older brother of Mrs. Rose Canada Mariotti, who lived on 11th Street, West Side Hill. Dr. Gina Canada of Connellsville is a member of that family. Private Harold Kramer was a 1943 Connellsville grad and a member of the Coker swim team that won 5 consecutive WPIAL championships. He was killed on January the 18th, 1944 at Lazio, Italy. Private Albert Dioria was a 1931 Connellsville High School grad, and he volunteered with the distinction of being the first selectee from the Fayette County Draft Board number 1. He was inducted on November the 29th, 1940, under the Selective Service Act. According to the Daily Courier, Private Dioria was the first man from Connellsville to die in World War II. He was captured by the Japanese during the fall of Bataan and later died in a POW camp on August the 6th, 1942. His older brother was the late Louis Dioria, a local attorney in the 1950s, and I believe he also at one time was a city solicitor. Private Clarence Diebolt graduated from Connellsville High School in 1930 and was a member of the chemistry and French clubs and appeared in the school operetta. His father was the chief of the city fire department. Clarence was killed on July the 12th, 1944 in Normandy and is buried or memorialized there. Private Dieboldt's older brother, William, was a devoted member of the New Haven Hose Volunteer Fire Department for many decades. First Lieutenant Ivan Elpern was a 1935 graduate of Connellsville High School, where he played tackle on the football team and appeared in class plays. He served for 3 years with General Patton's Third Army and was the commanding officer of the 50th Armored Infantry Battalion. He asked to be sent into the heat of combat, and he was killed in action the very next day, on January the 14th, 1945, in Belgium. He is buried at the B'nai Israel Cemetery in Greensburg. Second Lieutenant Wayne Forsythe was a 1937 graduate of Connellsville High School and then attended Carnegie Tech, we now know as Carnegie Mellon University. As a member of the Carnegie Tech football team, he played in the 1939 Sugar Bowl against TCU. He died in a plane crash in 1943. Now, you might see here in that Courier headline the mention of Smithton. He did reside in Smithton, but he went to school here. And I think at that time there were students who came from outside of the community to come to high school here. So again, the committee decided if you lived here or went to school here, you're still considered the right eligibility to be on the honor roll. Lieutenant George Hart was a 1939 graduate of Connellsville High School where he played football, was on the track team and student council. He then graduated from the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis in 1943. His ship, the USS Sigsbee, was hit by Japanese torpedoes on April the 14th, 1945. The damage control crew saved the ship, but Lieutenant Hart and 20 other crew members were killed and buried at sea. Shown here is the burial at sea service for Lieutenant Hart and 2 other crew members. Private First Class Carl McElhaney was a 1943 graduate of Connellsville High, and he was killed in action on January the 25th, 1944, during Operation Shingle, the Allied amphibious landing in the Italian campaign in the area around Anzio. He had been in the military only 19 months and was the first man from South Connellsville to be killed in action. He was only 19. His body was returned home after the war to be reinterred in Hillgrove Cemetery on Snyder Street. First Lieutenant Earl Moon was a 1939 graduate of Connellsville High School. His family worshiped at Otterbein Methodist Church on Lincoln Avenue, and he was a B-25 pilot and flew 42 successful missions before his plane was shot down over the Mediterranean Sea on August the 15th, 1944. He received the Air Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters. Private First Class Bernie Olszewski was a member of the 1941 Connellsville Coker football team that included Heisman Trophy winner Johnny Lujack and longtime Connellsville resident John Wally Schroyer. This was the first undefeated Coker football team since 1912. Bernie was chosen to the All-Fayette County team and was described as a fierce tackler. He was killed on September the 19th, 1944, and he is buried in France. Private First Class Victor Peterson of 501 York Avenue graduated from Connellsville High School in 1938, and he was a letterman on the undefeated Coker swim team that had won the WPIAL championship. He was a member of the First Division, also known as the Big Red One. He was the first Connellsville man to die in France. He was killed on D-Day, June the 6th, 1944, during the Allied invasion of Europe. He was honored with a Bronze Star and the Distinguished Service Cross the nation's second highest honor for bravery. His final resting place is in Block 8, Row 8, Grave 10 in the American Military Cemetery in Normandy. His youngest, Sister Dorothy, called me in 2020 from her home in Illinois and said Victor had planted a tree near the side of their home at 501 York Avenue, and as of 2020, it was still there. And she hoped it would never be cut down. Joseph Rowe was a 1938 graduate of Immaculate Conception High School and had served as an altar boy. He hoped someday to be a chemist. He was killed on July the 11th, 1944, near Normandy while serving as a medic. He was awarded the Silver Star, the nation's third highest medal for heroism. His award reads as follows, quote, "After taking an objective, soldiers were forced to withdraw in the face of heavy enemy fire. Rowe observed that a number of casualties remained on the battlefield. He rushed to give them first aid, with mortar shells bursting around him. He was killed by enemy rifle fire. His bravery, fidelity, and total devotion to duty exemplifies the highest tradition of service," end quote. He was brought home December the 10th, 1947, to be buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery, and Father Henry Geibel conducted the funeral mass at IC Church. Major Harry Shensick was a 1927 Connellsville grad and a 1933 graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. The family lived at 210 East Green Street, and his father was a cashier at the Citizens National Bank in town. I believe that's the building on the southeast corner of Brimstone Corner, where the State Farm Insurance Office is located. The major died on February the 21st, 1945, from starvation and disease in a Japanese POW camp. There is a tombstone for him at the West Point Cemetery. Medic Stephen Soltis was the son of immigrants. His parents arrived here from Czechoslovakia in the early 20th century. He was killed in action on September the 16th, 1944 in Germany. He received a Silver Star. His citation reads as follows. During intense mortar and machine gun fire, Soltis rushed to give aid to the wounded, even though he too had been wounded. While giving aid to a wounded officer, Soltis was then mortally wounded by enemy machine gun fire. End quote. He is buried in Belgium. Second Lieutenant Paul Swallop was a 1939 graduate of Connellsville High School, and he co-authored the lyrics to the senior class song and was a speaker at his high school graduation ceremony. He maintained a perfect 100% average in his high school chemistry class and received a scholarship to Carnegie Tech University in Pittsburgh. He was killed in action and lost over the ocean on December the 2nd, 1944 in the Pacific area. I just briefly mentioned 17 names contained in this project. Time would not permit me to go into greater detail to include all the information in each one of these stories. There are another 128 men who were brave and were American heroes who are memorialized in this book, and all of their stories are inspiring. They make us grateful and proud. As President Calvin Coolidge once said, "A nation that forgets its defenders will itself be forgotten." I thank you all very, very much. Oh, and also, by the way, and you probably all know this, if you had me for history class, you do. But Veterans Day got its start in Connellsville. Mr. Max Floto and Mr. Thomas Scott were both World War I veterans. And in 1919, they were at a meeting down here at our VFW post on Arch Street. And they brought it up, I guess, in a meeting to have a resolution to say that then Armistice Day, November the 11th, 1918, should be observed as a holiday. And they didn't stop there. Then they petitioned the state VFW convention. Then they petitioned the national VFW convention in 1921. I think it was held in Minneapolis. And then they wrote letters to local congressmen, to the president. And by 1938, Franklin Roosevelt signed the papers to declare Armistice Day as a national holiday. And in 1954, President Dwight Eisenhower changed the name to Veterans Day. And Mr. Max Floto received an award or a proclamation from the United States Congress in 1978, designating him the father of Armistice Day. So I tell everybody that I know about that. There is so much history in this town that we need to toot our horn a little bit more. We do. So again, share that information with your children, your grandchildren, your friends and neighbors. Veterans Day started right here. Okay? I'm keeping this young lady.
No. I just wanted to thank you, Judy, for that very beautiful tribute to all those young men who gave their lives for our freedom.
I know, it's sad. Thank you. Thank you. And is this auditorium a treasure? Yes. Look at it. Look at it. I mean, people in our community, if you're not coming to this library, you are missing. You are missing a treasure on the National Registry of Historic Landmarks. And this auditorium, the floors, the new painting, everything, it's gorgeous. Thank you again, Sharon. I appreciate it. Thank you, Armstrong. And thank you, audience, for your attention. And I appreciate it. I appreciate it a lot.